Is there a place for puns on the pulpit? Can there be silliness in the sanctuary?
Good evening, Rabbi.
Good evening, and Noor, may I be the first one to say, I love what you've done with your hair.
Oh, I love what you've done with yours too, Rabbi.
Apparently there is, in just about every faith tradition and spiritual path, as you hear in this edition of AIB Presents, A Time to Laugh, Holy Humor.
Noor, I don't want to compare and contrast and be, a little too proud, but my religion is so holy. In the ancient times, the women covered their heads.
Oh, wow. That sounds so unique, Rabbi.
All right.
First, let's unroll the scroll of holy history. In the Hebrew Bible sacred to Jews and the New Testament sacred to Christians, there are multiple examples of humor. Take the story of elderly Abraham and Sarah. They laugh when angels tell them they're going to have a child. The biblical story of Jonah and the whale sounds far-fetched, if not amusing. There's even a book, The Humor of Christ, by Christian theologian Elton Trueblood, that documents no fewer than 30 New Testament passages, many of them one-liners and parables attributed to Jesus. Hindu texts are full of humorous stories, and commentary on the Quran illustrates the Muslim prophet Muhammad's playful side. Mingling humor and religion is nothing new for this faith leader. Rabbi Stephen Lebo of Temple Colomuth in Marietta, Georgia.
Do you know why I use a lot of humor in my rabbinate and in my religion? I think that life is terrible. I think that life itself, it's like the Buddhist part of me welling up. I think that life is horrible, usually, and on its best day it's terrible, right? Because the whole point of life is you're here, and then poof, you're not here. You're gone. So I figured, given the parameters of how horrible it is, that we come and we go, and people that we love, they'll come and they'll leave our, sight. Yeah, I think it'd be better to have a sense of humor, right? That's how you keep some sanity. Secondly, people that are convinced, they know the right thing of religion and everything, and they're not funny at all, that's probably a bad thing. You don't have to everybody be funny, but if you take yourself so seriously, I'm not really sure that I want to meet your God. Okay?
So you're saying God maybe wants us to be funny?
Yes, I absolutely believe that that's one of the things he gives us. He gives us humor as well as wall-to-wall carpeting. I think that was something that came from God also.
Reverend David Sapp served as senior pastor at Second Ponce de Leon Baptist Church in Atlanta for 13 years and often sprinkled his sermons with humorous stories.
Religion is such a serious subject. There isn't any more serious subject. So a lot of people have a wall up to begin with when they walk into a sanctuary. Okay, we're going to do the serious religion stuff here. And humor disarms, and it allows you to be human together. And once people have laughed together, then you can get to the serious in a often more effective way. So I if I go for a while and nobody laughs or even chuckles, if I do that for several sermons in a row, I'm like, hey, something's wrong here. I need to fix that.
The Reverend Marthame Sanders, an ordained Presbyterian minister, uses improv as a teaching tool both in and outside of the church. His podcast, AIJcast, features conversations and performances at the intersection of art, inspiration, and justice.
When I think of humor in the scriptures, there's two places that come to mind. In the Hebrew Bible, there's a story of the Hebrew midwives who the Egyptians want to kill all of the male-born Israelites. And so the response of the midwives, when they're asked, why haven't you been doing this? Their response is, by the time we get there, these Hebrew women, they're so strong that the babies are already out, so we can't do anything about it. Which to me is kind of a playful misdirect for the sake of liberation and justice in a powerful way. Jesus uses wordplay, particularly throughout the Gospel of John, uses words that have two meanings, and the person he's talking to always misunderstands which meaning he's referring to. So there's a playfulness in that. And Jesus also uses humor in ways to respond to the Pharisees' questions so that there's a misdirect. There's all kinds of ways that Jesus, I think, deconstructs and uses, I don't know if humor is the right word, but playfulness which is humor adjacent to me, is something that Jesus uses to good effect.
Noor Abadi, who is Muslim, manages the Interfaith Speakers Network.
What's funny is that what usually comes across, what people remember from these interfaith panels, is not necessarily the material that was presented, which is more of a 101 crash course about every faith religion, even though it's important and they ask for handouts at the end. What they remember is that spirit between the speakers, the jokes, the humor, the banters. So I think humor can be very, especially if it's genuine, can be extremely powerful tool to convey more than presentations and serious talk.
Abadi also co-hosts an annual Interfaith Thanksgiving service with Rabbi Lebo. A big draw, their lively banter.
What is the most famous opening to most jokes that you've heard? What is it?
Rabbi and a priest and an imam walk into a bar. Yeah.
Right? Where did that come from?
I don't know.
Yeah, there seems to be, I think, a traditional, conventional expectation that this is going to be something that's funny when three religious figures are going to be together.
Jamela Jihad is a Muslim woman who hosts regular comedy nights for women only as Judy Jan.
She's a people person, and she only performs for women. Why? Because she cannot talk about men in their presence. She don't want to make them feel bad. But she really don't talk about men. Even at Judy Jam, we don't spend our time talking about men. We talk about life. We talk about grandchildren. We talk about children. We talk about how to raise children in faith. Because some of them munchkins, whew, Lord, today, in this time, now, I don't know why they took God out of the school. The purpose of my comedy shows is to bring awareness to women. It's all women, for all women, no men allowed. But bring awareness to people who's not Muslim and to women who are Muslim of their rights, and to teach people about Islam in a comical way.
Imam Arshad Anwar is spiritual leader of the Roswell Community Masjid. Humor for him is second nature.
For me personally, it's just kind of my personality to use humor, utilize humor, and I don't really see anything problematic with it in terms of when you're preaching or using it as a faith leader. So, but it was interesting to consider whether or not Scripture mentions humor.
Well, I understand that in the Quran there is something about Muhammad playing with children.
Yeah.
And, finding joy,
Yeah.
So humor, joy, it's not really the same thing necessarily, but, I could imagine laughter.
Yeah. Well, so that story may be more from a historical aspect, but there is a verse in the Quran which actually says, God is the one who made you capable of laughing, and He's the one that made you capable of crying and grieving. And so the mention of it is definitely there, and so you understand that it's something natural, it's something God-given, both crying and laughter, and so it should be utilized, I guess, in a proper way.
And there are stories attributed to the Prophet Muhammad that illustrate his sense of humor.
One man came to him and he needed an animal as a donation to, like a camel, to have his stuff to do his business and put his stuff on. And so he came and he said, "Do you have something you can give me?" And so he told him, he said, "I can give you," and the word he used was, "I can give you the child of a camel." And to him that translated as a baby camel. And he said, "What am I going to do with a baby camel? I need like a real camel." And he just responded and he said, every camel is a baby camel. Every camel at one point is a child of a camel. So that's one, like, kind of the way he used humor. In one other instance, may not be so tasteful to do it so now, but an elderly woman came to him and she asked about paradise. And so he looked at her and he said, "No elderly woman will go to paradise." And she started crying and she turned to walk away, and he said, No. He said, "What I mean is, when you go to paradise, we will all be young and we will not be in our old age." And so he kind of used humor, and he felt maybe a little bad when she started tearing up a little bit. Yeah. Well, you have these instances where he would utilize humor in his teaching as well.
His Holiness the Tibetan Buddhist leader, the Dalai Lama, often uses humor in his public appearances, often to make the point that humans are social animals and must be joyful and playful, a teaching common to other traditions.
There's the proverb that says that laughter is good. There's Ecclesiastes that says that, the proverb says laughter is like medicine. But there's the word in Ecclesiastes that says there's a time to mourn, a time to dance, there's a time to weep, and a time to laugh. So, yes, I think a lot of people, Eldon Trueblood wrote a book on the humor of Christ, and there's a lot of stuff out there on humor in both the Hebrew Scriptures and in the New Testament.
Well, I mean, one interesting thing to understand about prophets, especially from an Islamic perspective, is that we look at them as entirely human. And so therefore, when they come to teach humans, they teach humans all about the life that they live in this world. So they're not just people that are locked up in places of worship, and they're dealing with people in their real lives. And so, they utilize humor, they utilize grief and sadness, they feel anger, fear, all for themselves, and then they teach us how to kind of express those emotions as well.
When I was very young, one of my very first opportunities to preach, I went to this little country church full of old farmers, and I'm a very young minister, and I told a joke. And no one even smiled. I mean, the whole congregation just sat there stone-faced. And I'm like, gosh, are you not supposed to be funny here? Or did they not know that it was funny? Did I tell it wrong? What did it mortified me. So I didn't try to be funny again for probably 5 years. But you have to be willing. If you're going to be funny on a platform, you have to be willing to fail and comfortable with yourself and with that whole business, or you're in trouble.
Just because I'm a Reform or progressive rabbi, I've studied with Orthodox rabbis that everybody thinks, oh, they're so serious. But one of the rabbis in yeshiva says, no, absolutely, Steve, Rabbi Lebo, he says, I do Talmud joke. Talmud. He says every third or fourth paragraph I stop and I have a funny example or a cute joke. Or he said, because humor is what keeps you connected. You can't just focus and be serious sometimes, 8 hours.
So it's always a great icebreaker. It's always, if you can make somebody smile, it's actually, a good positive thing. Interestingly enough, some people can even ask the question, can humor be a form of worship? And so when we look at some of the traditions that we have, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was once asked, what are some of the best deeds that people can do? What are some good things people can do? And he listed some things out. The first thing he said was, if you bring happiness to another person. And that's considered a very, very good deed. So obviously, how do we bring happiness to somebody else? There's humor, there's that light personality that can kind of make them laugh and feel that joy. So humor can even be an act of worship.
It takes less than 1 minute to find out if you may have prediabetes. You can do it here. But you probably won't. You're busy. Kids, work, show coming back in 48 seconds. So let's do this now. Hold up one finger if you're a man. Women, 0. 3 more fingers if you're over 60. 2 over 50. 1 over 40. If you're not sure, keep in mind you're sitting on a couch right now, so 1 more finger if you're not very active. 1 finger if yes, 0 if no. 1 yes, 0 no. Next, find the body type that looks most like you and hold up that many fingers while I look around awkwardly. And that's it. If you're holding up 5 fingers or more, you probably have prediabetes. Sorry to be so blunt, but hey, you're busy. Just go to the site.
I think of humor this way when it comes to that kind of pastoral relationship. I think humor can be double-edged in that sense. I think there's a way humor can be a defense mechanism in which it's not helpful. to avoid something more serious and people using humor as a way to, I don't want to talk about that, it's too serious. I think it's important to talk about serious stuff. At the same time, I think humor can also be a disruptive force for good. Like you talked about the Hebrew women with Pharaoh. I think there's also, one of the places I find that is Rabbi Friedman, who brought family systems notions of psychotherapy into the world of congregational study in very helpful ways. And so he talks about the ways in which humor can be a very effective tool for disrupting an unhealthy status quo. Absolutely. So that playfulness can come in and be disruptive, but in a way that's going to bring about healing down the road. And that's a way I see it being very helpful in a pastoral sense.
There are certain guidelines that Muslim scholars actually even put on humor. One of them being, so the Prophet himself, people told him, you joke with us. We find you that you joke with us. And he says, yes, but I only say the truth. And that was one thing very unique about his humor, was that he would always mention things that are honest. I think it was George Carlin that said, don't just make people laugh, make them think. And so truth in the form of comedy is very powerful. You look at guys like Jon Stewart, his successor,
Stephen Colbert.
Yeah, how they use truth to make us laugh, but also to really make us think. So there's a lot of power in humor itself. So
I think satire can teach us something about how religion and humor might intersect. There's this saying in satire, always punch up. And I don't like the violence of it, but the idea of the target of your humor should be the powerful, not the weak. And so when we are in a world where, particularly right now in this moment, in an American culture where white supremacy is violent and on the rise, somebody like me, a straight, white, Christian, Southern male, needs to be comfortable being the object of humor.
Right.
And if I'm punching my punchlines, the object of those punchlines should never be down. And that's a bit of a hierarchical term, but I should never be going after the person who doesn't have the power. I should be using that humor to target the people who are in power. Because I think what religion is about in most of its manifestations is about justice. And justice is about recognizing that there are power differentials in the world, right, and is trying to do something to address those for the sake of the people who don't have the power.
That is an excellent point. And I find sometimes people ask me, why do you think it's okay for you as a Muslim woman to make a joke about fellow Muslim women or about fellow Muslims, but it's not okay for me, a person who comes from a different group, to make that joke? And the answer is what you said, it's power dynamic. If you cannot make that joke if you belong to a more perceived powerful, more powerful group. So I wish that people would actually get and understand that.
Yeah, I think that's been my frustration with the so-called insult comics, like a Don Rickles, who's I'm making fun of everybody, so you have to get over yourself. Well, I don't think you get to. I really don't think you get to. I think you have to be careful about who the object of your punchlines is, because you are demonstrating that you are thinking about what you're doing. There's a thoughtfulness, there's an attention to what it is, and the power that humor has.
I really try to be careful, but at a lot of funerals, they do tell me, the family, make it light, make it happy, remind us of who the person was in life. And I think that you will find, not at all, because some are tragic, but I think you will find at a lot of Jewish funerals, humor is used, because that's how we want to remember that person, engaged in life and having a good time. We don't want to always concentrate on, like I said before, on how hard life is. We want to savor and remember those moments, which oftentimes are tinged with humor.
And also in the Jewish tradition, there's that self-deprecating humor aspect.
There is. Would you like to hear a story?
Absolutely.
Awesome. Okay, so there is a Catholic priest, and he goes to the barber to have his haircut. And the haircut's done, and the Catholic priest turns to pay the barber, and the barber says, Father O'Flaherty, I'm not a Roman Catholic, but I have so much respect for what you do in the community. This one's on me. And the priest says, really? He says, yeah. He says, it's free? And then the barber says, yeah, it's absolutely free. So, the priest leaves. The next morning, the barber comes to work. What does he find there on his front step? A dozen rosaries that the priest left him. How nice to give to his Catholic clients. The following day, a Baptist minister comes. He goes into the barber cuts his hair, the Baptist minister goes to pay the barber. And the barber says, well, Pastor Jones, I'm not a Baptist, but everybody knows the good work that you do. This one's on me. This one's, good. And he says, it's free? And he says, oh, absolutely, it's free. And the minister says, that's so nice, thank you. So he leaves. The next morning, what does he find on his front doorstep? He finds a dozen Gideon Bibles that he could, hand out to friends and others. The following day, Rabbi Cohen walks in. Same scenario. He gets his hair cut. Rabbi Cohen goes to pay the barber. The barber says, Rabbi, everybody knows what a nice guy you are. This one's on me. The rabbi goes, seriously, it's free? And the barber says, yes, it's absolutely free. And the rabbi says, oh, well, that's nice. And he leaves. The next morning, the barber comes to work. And what does he find on his front doorstep? A dozen rabbis. A dozen rabbis. Now, this is an extremely anti-Semitic joke, so that the Jews always want a good deal. So if I, as the rabbi, tell it, it's a great joke. If you are not Jewish and you tell that joke, you're a damn anti-Semite. All right? So we do self-deprecate. We think of funny things.
Many years ago, I went to preach in a church, and the lady came up to me after service, and she said, I went to visit a lady in our community this week. She's 102, and she said to me, I feel terrible all the time. I'm in pain, I don't feel good, I don't sleep at night, I'm miserable, I ask God to let me die, and He won't let me die, and I don't understand this. And the lady who's telling me the story said, well, I just looked at her and I said, well, I want to comfort her. I said, Miss Jones, God is leaving you here because He has something left for you to do. Miss Jones said, well, I'm not going to do it. And I've loved that story for all these years, and I tell it a lot of places. It has a way of saying something that most people think, well, it would be inappropriate to tell God you weren't going to do something. But at 102, I guess you can get away with a lot.
It's interesting. It's called the rule of thirds. And you can apply that. I mean, if you think of anything, it has a beginning, middle, and end, a piece of music. So jokes are often constructed around the rule of thirds. So a rabbi, priest, and minister, or the guy goes back 3 times, and the punchline always occurs on the third and final trope.
Through my training as an improviser, I've been taking classes in improv comedy. And what it has essentially taught me is that improv comedy is all about, it's not being the quickest or the cleverest. It's about being the person who can pay attention, who can notice what's going on, who can adapt and adjust, be empathetic. There's a lot of other qualities that happen. And the quote that I love is, life is improv. Why not get good at it?
But I do ask brides and grooms, what's the humor quotient? Like really, really funny or slightly funny, Rabbi Lebo, or just keep it. Now, you'd be surprised, most people do ask for funny. Yeah. A lot of people say, like a girl will say, well, I don't want to cry on my wedding day, I don't want to be nervous, so make us laugh. Of course, my problem is once I get on a roll, I don't know when to stop. So I've learned in recent months and years, a couple of jokes is okay. Try not to go on too much.
Now, as you're talking, I'm recalling, and maybe this is apocrypha, but you have been known to do cartwheels down the aisles of the...
I'm sure that could not possibly be. Yes, but if it had happened, I would, people will say, if a rabbi cartwheels down the aisle, or down on the pews or whatever, that he is not dignified, right? My response is, no, if you cartwheel down the aisle, you'll get people's attention. And the next thing that comes out of your mouth, some valuable piece of Torah or scripture, they'll listen to you because you were somersaulting a moment before.
But I do think that there is in Scripture this picture of God who celebrates with us. And have you ever seen a celebration where there wasn't laughter? I mean, there are 2 things that are always present in any celebration, laughter and music, or it's not a celebration. So I have this problem with people who want to go to worship and say, okay, now we shall just be solemn and we must discover a theology of celebration. Well, but we can't tell jokes, and we can't say funny things, and we can't have joyful music. If you want to celebrate, you need to laugh.
I think humor and joy are related, and so I think Jesus says to have life and life abundant, and I think there should be abundant joy. And that doesn't mean, like we said earlier, it's not about diminishing the evil in the world or pretending like bad stuff doesn't happen. I think joy comes in the face of the reality that those things are real.
I totally agree. I think the whole point of faith is to be able to cultivate that peace and that serenity and that joy, and that real and good humor comes from a place of serenity and peace and joy. So yeah, definitely.
Now, what is humor? Because psychologists and philosophers have tried to describe humor. It's obviously a physiological thing. When you have deep belly laughs, oh my God, that's good for your autoimmune system. But structurally, if you watch a joke or something that's humorous, it zigs when you thought it was going to zag, right? The story has you one way, and you're thinking, and you think you figured out what number 3 is, but it's the other way. And you're amused, you laugh, or you chuckle, guffaw, or chortle the fact that it was supposed to be one thing, but it's another thing.
I mean, we do have a joke. It's hard to explain, but like, you know how you have we have humans, we have angels, and we have what we call jinn. And jinn are like the creations that are made of fire, and Satan in Islam is considered from the jinn, not from the angel. And so we say, why do you say Bismillah or in the name of God before you drink water? You say because there's 3 jinns in the water. It's like oxygen. There's 2 oxygen and a hydrogen, right? So that would be something that would probably get a laugh from a Muslim audience.
So Moses, Jesus, and an old man are playing golf. They get up to the first hole. Moses gets it out his driver, hits it. It's headed right for the water hazard. Closes his eyes, raises his golf club. The water parts. The ball bounces on dry land. Lands 3 feet from the cup. Jesus gets up there. Same thing. Shot. Headed right for the water. It's about to go in the water. The last moment, sprouts legs, walks across the water, and then rolls on the green, ends up about 1.5 feet from the cup. And the old man gets up, driver, same thing. Ball's headed for the water. Right before it lands in the water, a fish jumps up, grabs the ball in its mouth. Like a flying fish, jumps, grabs the ball, and it's about to go back in the water, and a bird swoops down, grabs the fish in its talons, flies over the green, drops the fish, the ball rolls out of its mouth, lands on the edge of the cup. And then there's an earthquake. The ball falls in. Hole in one. Jesus turns and says, Dad, cut it out.
We do understand each other at a bottom level because most of us we're all children. We all have mothers and fathers. Most of us, if not all, are married. We have sons and daughters. We live the same 70, 80, 90 years. So while our religions may differ, but certainly the 3 monotheistic religions were very close in many ways. And then secondly, if we stop for a moment, we realize that humor is one of the gifts that God gave us in order to help us during whatever times we have.
Yeah. So true.
That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.